morning. Yesterday for one of the last things we saw was a Mishnah on Yud Aleph Amud 11b4, right? And we saw the first few lines after the Mishnah. But if you recall, in the Mishnah we had a machlokas about what is needed for the only part of the Gemara that we established was that this Mishnah was talking about a mavoi sasum. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, the whiteboard is here. Thank you. Okay, very, very exciting. I need to now use it. Okay, much appreciated.
Isn't that a cover on it? Oh.
Okay, I don't think I need like some headspace to figure out like no. Okay, thank you. Much appreciated. Okay, fantastic. We now have a whiteboard. I now have no excuse not to be as clear as possible. Okay, let's go. So, thank you very much. Thanks for making sure it happens. Okay, so again, in our Mishnah, we saw that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about what is needed to block off a mavoi. The Gemara established yesterday we're talking about a mavoi sasum. Remember, mavoi sasum means a mavoi that is closed off on three sides. Just to keep in mind, most of the when we're going to soon, I'm going to start getting a little bit more into how does this translate into our cities, like Baltimore. Baltimore is typically like when you think of the streets over here. Typically, mavoi is going to be the principle that we're going to think about. Okay, there's going to be there's almost like three different types of spaces that we've been speaking about until now. One is a mavoi mefulash, which is a mavoi which is open on both sides. Right, that is most comparable to our streets. Right, when you think about our streets, we have basically like houses and little courtyards opening up into streets. We'll call it an alleyway in halachic terminology, in the Gemara's terminology, but that's really what our streets are, and in the sense that they're open on both sides. They're mefulash in the sense they're open on both sides, whereas one of the things we're talking about over here is called a mavoi sasum, where it's closed off on three sides, where it's blocked off on one side, and then it's blocked off on the two sides, and it's only open on the last side. That's what this Mishnah is talking about. And then the other thing we're going to be talking about is a chatzar. A chatzar is a courtyard, which we'll see today, also has different needs when we talk about closing off the entranceway of the chatzar. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just thinking of Cheswold, because if you go down Cheswold, then it ends.
It does end, yes.
But then there's a house that has a walkthrough.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily, great question, but also keep in mind that it does end, but it's probably closer to, remember we had a machlokas about a mavoi akum, where it's closed, it's not really closed because really you turn, right. And then it continues, right? So that's really a mavoi akum, right? Okay, good, but you're applying this ritual, yes.
Are you saying it's literally a mavoi, or it just has the shape? I mean, it should have walls, right?
It should have walls, but halachically we're going to perceive our streets as a form of a mavoi, in the sense that the way that we're going to be blocking it off is going to be more similar to a mavoi. Correct. Even though there's no walls on the sides. Correct. Okay, but I'm getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to see more of the applications, but good. But I appreciate the question about Cheswold because that's making it right. We're trying to conceptualize how we're going to apply this to our modern streets. Okay, but the bottom line is like this: the Mishnah had a machlokas. Beis Shammai says you need a lechi and a korah. Beis Hillel says a lechi or a korah. And as the Gemara established yesterday, we're talking about a mavoi that is sasum, a mavoi that is closed off on three sides, and we're talking about the fourth side. What makes it closed off? Beis Shammai says lechi and korah. Beis Shammai says lechi and korah. Beis Hillel says lechi or korah. Right? That was what we saw yesterday. So Beis Shammai remember lechi and korah. We're again 11b4. If you're in the art scroll, it's the first column, end of the first column. Beis Shammai lechi korah. Beis Shammai says lechi and korah lememra de kasavri Beis Shammai arba mechitos daraisa. Does this mean to imply that Beis Shammai holds that really for something to be considered really enclosed, to be a real full-fledged Rishus Yachid, you need to have four walls? And that would explain why he's saying, okay, you have three walls, and then on the fourth wall, it's not enough just to have a lechi, or it's not enough just to have a korah. You need to have both, because we really want to make it like a fourth wall. And the Gemara says, no, maybe not. Lizdrok mishalosh shuna mechayev. Maybe he would agree that with three walls only, you would be liable if you were to throw something from a public domain into a three-walled space. And that would already be considered a Rishus Yachid, a private domain, right? And what's he talking about? L'taltel, but rabbinically, to allow you to carry, adika arba, he wants to have four full-fledged walls. Right? In other words, the fact that Beis Shammai does necessitate to carry in this space, he wants a lechi and a korah, don't therefore infer from there that he holds that biblically the only way to have a real full-fledged Rishus Yachid is to have four walls. Who says? Maybe, again, keep in mind, what are we talking about in this discussion? We're not talking about liability, right? There's two things. Whenever we talk about Rishus Yachid and Rishus around this, one thing is, are you allowed to carry in this space? Okay. The other thing is you're going to be liable if you threw something from or carried something from a public domain into that domain, or are you allowed to carry within that, right? So those are two separate things, right? So maybe Beis Shammai says, yes, if I took something from a public domain and walked into a space which has 3 walls, maybe I'll be liable. I'd have to bring a korban, which means that, biblically speaking, it is a Rishus HaYachid, full-fledged Rishus HaYachid with 3 walls. But the question over here is not liability. The question is, am I allowed to carry in this space? Okay, that's a new question. There, Beis Shammai is going to say, no, I need to have a 4th wall, I need to have a lechi and a korah. So don't make that inference. That's what the Gemara is rejecting, okay? The Gemara now is going to make have a similar dialogue with Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel omrim, o lechi, o korah. Beis Hillel says either a lechi or a korah is sufficient if it's surrounded with 3 walls. Lema kasari Beis Hillel sholosh bechitzos doraisa. So maybe you see from here, the fact that all he needs is just a lechi or korah, which is like a minimal type of a wall. Does that tell us that if it's surrounded by 3 walls, it's Rishus HaYachid, and 2 walls would not be Rishus HaYachid? Lo, you also can't make any inference from there, because Lizrok maybe in regards if you take something and you carry it from a public domain into a place which is surrounded by 2 walls alone, Mishtayim Hud Mechayev, maybe you would be liable with just 2 walls. So why can't you carry there? Lataltel adika shalosh, but to carry in that space, the rabbis came along and said you need to have 3 complete walls. Right? In other words, so from both their opinions, you can't necessarily infer what they hold biblically, because we keep in mind, all we're talking about is the rabbinic allowance to carry in that place, which could be more stringent, which logically we're going to say is more stringent than simply the parameters would have needed in order for liability. Okay? Makes sense? Okay, let's go further. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lechayan. Rabbi Eliezer says you need 2 lechis. Right? In our Mishnah we had Beis Shammai says lechi and korah. Beis Hillel says lechi or korah, and Rabbi Eliezer said 2 lechis. Okay? Ibailahu. Rabbi Eliezer lechayan v'korah ka'amar, o dilma lechayan below korah ka'amar. When Rabbi Eliezer said you need to have 2 lechis, was he saying 2 lechis alone? Or was he saying 2 lechis and a korah, right? Korah being the top part, right? Which one is it? So Tashma. So we're going to try to bring an answer. Ma'aser Rabbi Eliezer shalach itzor Rabbi Yossi ben Preda Tamido. Rabbi Eliezer went to visit Rabbi Yossi ben Preda, his students, LaOvalin, to a place called Ovalin. Umitzau sheyoshe b'mavoy, and he found him dwelling in a mavoy. She'ein lo ela lechi echad, which only had 1 lechi at its entrance. Okay, so again, this is Rabbi Eliezer who said 2 lechis in our Mishnah. So Rabbi Eliezer visits his students, and he sees him in a mavoy he's living in a mavoy which only has 1 lechi. So he says, Amar lo b'ni aseh lichi acher, make another lechi. So Amar lo, Rabbi Yossi ben Preda, his student, says back to him, do I really need to close it off? Why do I need so much? Amar lo yisasim mabakach. Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah, seal it off. What's the big deal? Why do you give me a hard time? You should seal it off. Okay? So that's the dialogue between them. We're going to come back to this dialogue in a moment, because that dialogue is going to help us understand what Rabbi Eliezer's position is. Is it 2 lechis and a korah, or is it just a lechi, or is it just 2 lechis? Okay, but then the Brisa continues and says, Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Lo nechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel amavoy shu pachos me'arba amos. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel do not argue about a mavoy that is less than 4 amos. In that case, they both agree she'eno tzarich klum. Then if it's less than 4 amos, if it's less than 4 amos, you don't need anything. Not a lechi or a korah. Okay, we're going to come back to that line soon. What do they argue? Al rachami arba amos v'ad eser, a mavi entrance that is from 4 to 10 amos wide. Beis Shammai omrim lechi v'korah. Beis Shammai says a lechi and a korah. Ubeis Hillel omrim o lechi o korah. Beis Hillel says you either need a lechi or a korah. Okay, fine. Bottom line, we'll come back to that last line. But the bottom line is, let's go back to Rabbi Eliezer, who told his students you should put 2 lechis. He said you need another lechi. And the response by a student was, why do I need to block it off? Sosei means to really block it off. So it says the Gemara, Ketani Mias. It said, V'chilas sosman itzarach. Rabbi Yossi ben Preda pushed back to his teacher and says, do I need to seal it off? So if you want to say that Rabbi Eliezer was saying you need to put more, he was saying you need to put another lechi and a korah. That's why Rabbi Yossi ben Preda was saying, do you really need to seal it off? But if all he was saying was 2 lechis without a korah, what does it mean seal it off? That's not sealing it off. In other words, if you're saying I need to cover it on all sides, okay, that's really called sealing it off. But if it's just 2 lechis, why is it called sealing it off? So Hachika Amar, the Gemara says, no, maybe there's no proof from there. What he means is, do you need me to seal it off with lechis? In other words, what he's saying is as follows. The way the Rashba at least explains it is that we're talking about a case where the entrance is quite narrow, and therefore putting 2 lechis would be a case of blocking it off. In other words, if we're talking about a regular-sized mavoy, here we go. Okay, if we're talking about a regular-sized mavoy, yeah, okay. If we're talking about a regular-sized mavoy, right? So this is your mavoy, okay? This is your mavoy, and it's like this. So he comes and he sees him with one lechi, and he says, oh, And he says, put another lechi. And his student says, why do I need to put another lechi? Do I need to cover it off? Now, if I'm putting another lechi over here, is that called cover, like so small? So means block it off. What do you mean? There's like a huge entrance, right? So it must be what, so the Gemara is initially assuming, it must be he was saying in addition to the two side posts, he was also necessitating, I know this is not three-dimensional, but like the top thing, okay? It's not meant to be curved, okay? But now we're saying, right, because then it makes sense. The sos means I'm really blocking it off. But the answer the Gemara is saying is, no, you were thinking the mavoi so wide, really it's very narrow. And therefore he had one lechi over here, and he says, because if he's putting another lechi, it's really blocking it off because now there's such a tiny little entrance. Wow, it's so good that we have a whiteboard. Okay, let's go further. Okay, let's go further. Okay, Amar Mar. Okay, so we had in the Brisa, Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel said, Lo nechlu b'sham v'sil amavish pachas be'arba amos, she'eno tzar chlum. Right, so Rav Shimon Gamliel comes along and says that Beisham v'sil both agree when it's more narrow than 4 amos, you don't need anything to adjust it. Okay, so when you have a mavui that has a very narrow entrance, 4 amos means, it's not so narrow by the way, it's 8 feet, 4 amos is about 8 feet, okay? So when you have an 8 feet open entrance, then you don't need anything, okay? Vanantznan, what are you talking about? In our Mishnah above we said, Mishum v'shmal amar tamad echel l'fnei Rabbi Kiva, lo nechlu beisham v'sil amavi shu pachas me'arba amos, shu nitra obelechi b'kora, okay? That's they said in our Mishnah. It says in the name of Rabbi Kiva, where Rabbi Shmuel said, that Rabbi Shmuel said that a student said in front of Rabbi Kiva that when it's between 4 and 10 that you do need a lechi or a korah. In other words, there's a bit of an issue over here. In our Mishnah, we had Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We have a view that's saying Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that when it's 4 and that when it's less than 4 amos, then everyone agrees you still need something. But there, Beis Shammai, who normally says you need both lechi and korah, he'll agree you need one or the other. But here we have Rav Shimon Gamliel saying you need nothing when it's less than 4. Which one is it? Right? One says you need nothing when it's less than 4, and now, and yet in our Mishnah it says you need a lechi or a korah when it's less than 4. Okay, big debates. So Amar Vashi Yachi Gamar Eino Tzarach Lechi v'Korah K'Beis Shammai v'Lo Lechayayin K'Rebbe Eliezer O Lechi O Korah K'Beis Hillel. So Rav Ashi says no. This is what Rav Shimon ben Gamliel meant. It's consistent with our Mishnah. What he was saying was like this: it doesn't need a lechi and a korah. When the Mishnah says it doesn't need anything, it doesn't mean Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in our when the Brisa said that you don't need anything, that's incorrect. We're reading it incorrectly. Rather, what he meant to say was, it doesn't need a lechi and a korah like Beis Shammai. So it doesn't need a lechi and a korah like Beis Shammai, nor does it need 2 lechis like Rabbi Eliezer. O lechi o korah Beis Hillel rather needs a lechi or a korah like Beis Hillel, which is exactly consistent with our Mishnah, because that's exactly what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree when it's a small opening, i.e. 8 feet, that's considered a small opening, then you need either a lechi or a korah. And although it sounded like Rav Shimon was saying you don't need anything, that's not what you misread him. What he was saying is you don't need the stringencies of Beis Shammai, i.e. lechi and korah. You don't need the stringencies of Rabbi Eliezer says 2 lechis. Okay? Rather, you need just a lechi or just a korah like Beis Hillel. But it's consistent with the Mishnah. It says you still need something. Okay? Says the Gemara further. The Kama. Okay. So let's say it's narrower than 4 amos. Okay? Right? At what point do we still need something? In other words, fine. So now we said 4 amos, you still need a lechi or korah. But let's say it's only like 1 amma. Well, you still need a korah? What if it's 2 amos, right? So we're saying less than 4 amos, you would still need a lechi or korah. Granted. But is there a minimal measure where we say, okay, there's no need for a lechi or korah at all at that point because the entrance is so small, so narrow, okay? So Rav Achlai v'tem Rav Yechiel ad arba. So Rav Achlai and some say Rav Yechiel say that if it's less than 4 tfachim, okay, if it's less than 4 tvachim, then no lechi or korah is needed at all. So if let's say you have an entranceway and it's less than 4 tvachim, 4 tvachim again is like quite small. You're really like slipping through it, right? So you're talking about just a few, just a very, very small space. Then we would say you wouldn't need anything at all. Let's turn the page. Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Amar Rav Modim. Okay. Fine. Pause. Okay, so basically that's what we're coming out. We're coming out that if it's less than 4 tvachim, then you do not need to have anything at all. Now we're going to move on to a chatzar. At a later point, we have to come back and address why it is that, as we'll see, by a chatzar, the Gemara is going to establish, we're going to be more stringent than we are with a mavoi, which is funny because a chatzar is more private than a mavoi. Again, let's review. There's houses, batim, right? Houses open up into chatzar, that's their courtyard, and then courtyards open up into the alleyways. The mavos, right? So what we're going to see in this Gemara is that a chatzar, to block off a chatzar, is actually going to be more stringent than blocking off a mavoi. Okay, hard to understand, but we'll come back to that. So Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Amar Abba, Amar Rav, Modim Chacham Rabbi Eliezer b'pasei chatzar. The Chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer, okay, in regards to the boards used to open up, to close off a chatzar, that two are required. Okay, so we have Rabbi Eliezer telling us, remember Rabbi Eliezer just above in the Mishnah told us that you need to have two lechis by a mavoi. So now he said when it comes to a chatzar, they agree to block off a chatzar, you need two. One is not sufficient. Rav Nachman Amar halacha Rabbi Eliezer b'pasei chatzar. Rav Nachman says, not that they agree, but the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to a chatzar that you need two. So effectively, they're saying the same thing. It's just how they say it. One opinion says, even the Chacham agree when it's a chatzar, when it's courtyard, you do need two things. Okay, opinion number two says, really the Chacham argue by a chatzar, but the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer says you need two. Bottom line is they both agree you need two. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Man Modim. Okay, who is this opinion? Rebbe. It's Rebbe who holds that a chatzar entrance needs two side posts. Rebbe is of the opinion that when it comes to chatzar, you do need two side posts. Okay, and then halacha b'chal tefligi, Rav Nachman who holds that the chacham disagree. Who does that go like? Man paligale Rabbanan. It's the Rabbanan in the following brisa who holds that even by chatzar all you need is one. Tanya the brisa says chatzar niteres pas echad. A chatzar becomes permitted by placing one board. Rabbi Yomi Mishnei pas, and Rabbi says you need to have a board on each side. Okay, so again you see quite clearly that that when it comes to a chatzar, we're going to be more stringent. In this brisa, we have Rebbe saying you need to have two boards, and again, you have this machlokas whether we go like Rebbe, meaning that even the chacham agree, or that we paskin like Rebbe, and the chacham the chacham don't agree. But the bottom line is, what's coming out is that by a chatzar, we're going to end up having two boards, a board on each side. Okay, so now we go further into that discussion. Amrav Asi, Amrav Yochanan, chatzar tricha shtei pas, and a chatzar needs two boards. Okay, one on each side. Amrle Rav Zer Rav Asi, mi Amar Rav Yochanan Hachi. Do Rav Yochanan really say that you need to have two boards? Va'atu to Amras Mishmei Rav Yochanan. Didn't you quote Rav Yochanan saying Pasi chatzar trichen shemhein arba? Okay, that the entranceway of a chatzar needs to have 4 tefachim. Okay, so why is that a question? Again, let's just pause, slow down for a split second. Again, you want to say now, we're talking about now, does a chatzar need two boards or one board? Right? Makes sense? We don't need a picture of that, right? Chatzar, the courtyard, right? And do we need one board or two boards? Now we have Rav Yochanan quoted as saying, you need two boards. The challenge is we have Rav Yochanan elsewhere saying that the board by a chatzar needs to have 4 tefachim. Okay, why is that a question? We'll see. The reason it's a question, v'chitema arba mikan v'arba mikan. Okay, so you'll say, very good, you need to have 4 tefachim on each side. Right? Now you can easily reconcile and say, you need to have two things, one thing on each side, and how big are these things? 4 tefachim. That shouldn't be a contradiction. The problem, the reason it's a contradiction is because Vatani Rav Ada bar Avimi, Kamed Rav Chanina, Varmile Kamed Rav Chanina bar Papi, that Ketana be'eser, Gdola ba'achad esrei. Remember the case of the courtyard that we saw earlier? We had the big courtyard and the small courtyard opening up into one another, right? And there we said, how large is the larger courtyard? 11 amos. How large is the smaller one? 10 amos. Remember that case, the 10 amos and 11 amos, the two courtyards opening up into one another, right? So there, how much is one amma in tefachim? 6 tefachim. Excellent. 6 tefachim. Excellent, right? So if and we're allowing you to carry in the larger chatzar, right? So now, how much of a lechi is in the larger chatzar on each side? At the very most 3 tefachim on each side. If it's 6 divided by 2, we all got that, right? That's 3, right? So if you want to tell me, Rav Yochanan holds that. Right, we have 2 statements from Rav Yochanan. One is by a chatzar you need to have a thing on each side, and then you have another statement where Rav Yochanan says you need to have the lechi for a chatzar has to be 4 tefachim. Well, how does that reconcile with this Mishnah, with this teaching, of Rav Ada bar Avimi, who said that it's 10 and 11, which would mean there's only 3 on each side, right? So the Gemara says like this. No, he saw like Rav Zera Miyami when Rav Zera returned from the sea. Parashi explained it. Beruach achas ba'arba. Okay, that when it's only on one side, then it's mini 4 tefachim. Mishtei ruchos, mashalakan, mashalakan. When it's on both sides, then you need to have, then just a little bit on each side is all you need. Okay, so basically the way we're explaining it right now, Rabbi Yochanan is basically, okay, and then one more line over 12a3, v'adatani Ada bar Avimi, Rabbihi, v'savar Rav Yossi. Okay, and this opinion of Ada bar Avimi, that reflects the opinion of Rabbi, who says you need on both sides, which is consistent with what we're seeing with Rabbi Yochanan right now. V'savar Rav Yossi, but he holds like Rav Yossi, who holds that 3 tefachim is always going to be the minimal amount of a side post. Okay, so the bottom line is just to reconcile all the different views. You have Rav Yochanan, who is coming along and saying that you do need to have, right? Rav Yochanan. Yeah? Okay. Rav Yochanan. Yeah, we have Rabbi Yochanan's view, who says, these need a drawback, we need to get new ones. Okay, I'll get it. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan holds that basically you need to have, if you have one side, it's going to be, this doesn't even draw, one side, you're going to have 4 tvachim, because it has to be larger, right, if it's going to be one side, because then you want it to cover more things. If it's going to be 2 sides, then you're going to have just a little bit, mashahu means just a tiny bit, because that would be enough just to cover it off, right? Because that would be enough to close it. If you're going to just close it on one side, you're going to want to have a lot more, and that is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Wow, you can't see it, and but hopefully you heard it. Okay, maybe the other markers work better. We'll see soon. Okay, I'm going to test them out later. Okay, let's go a little further. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Chatzer niteres vas achad. A chatzer becomes permitted by placing one board at the side of the entrance. Amar Le'abal Rav Yosef, Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel really say this? Amar Le Shmuel Rav Chananya bar Shila at lo tavid uda ela barov dofen obishnei pasit. Shmuel says to Rav Chananya, when it comes to a chatzer, either the majority part of the wall should be closed off, or you should have 2 boards. Okay, so, and yet you just said, Shmuel said above, but it's a chatzir, 1 board is enough, right? So now we're asking contradiction, right? Again, we're still in this discussion about, does a chatzir need 2 boards or 1 board? And now when it comes to, so we've been going through different amorim. We talked about Rav Yochanan, we've established, he says, yes, you need both sides. Okay? If you just have one side, it's 4 tvachim. If it's 2 sides, a little bit works. Now we're in Shmuel. Now we have a contradiction in Shmuel. Shmuel says in one place, 1 side. Another place says 2 sides. Which one is it? Okay? Amar Le, Rav Yosef says, listen. I know of a certain incident that happened in the shepherd's village. There was a little bit of the sea. Look at that picture. You see the water encroaching into a chatzar? Okay? They came in front of Rav Yehuda, and he said clearly you only need 1 board. Amar Le. Rabbi says, L'shom Yom Ka'amras, you're asking by a sea? Kalu shekilu cham b'mayim. We have certain leniencies when it comes to water, that the cham are going to be more makel so that you could access water. Again, water is what makes the whole everything run, right? So you need to have access to water. So the fact that Rav Yosef tries bringing a proof from that case where water is going, he says maybe over there we're more lenient because we want people to be able to get that water, right? Water is now coming into the mavoy. Oh, good, now we have access to water, fantastic. So we'll be more lenient and let you use only 1 board. But don't bring me a proof to there for other cases where 1 board is going to work, and we bring a proof to this. Rav Tavla asked of Rav Mechitza Tzluya Maush Tatra Bechurba, could a suspended wall allow carrying? Okay, so suspended wall means that the wall, let's say you have, if you have an enclosed area, of course it's a private domain, but let's say you have a private domain that's suspended in the air, right? You have walls, but it's up in the air, or you let it carry in that space. You understand what I'm saying? Meaning, if you look at the picture, you see a picture where there's suspended walls. Look at the second picture on the page, right? So basically there are walls, full-fledged walls, but they're hanging in the air. So the Gemara says, it's a special leniency that was allowed regarding water. Okay, so basically don't bring me any proofs from water. The bottom line is, Mikol Makom Kasha, we still have a question in the sense that, what do we do with the contradiction of Shmuel? On the one hand, he says 1 side, yes, 2 sides, you don't need 2 sides. Other place said you need 2 sides. So ki asra papa rapuna breder of Yeshua meirav pershua. He explained in Murach Achas be'arba mishnei ruchos mashu lakan. Yes, once again we have that same reconciliation we had there for Rav Yochanan. When you are 1 side by a chatzar, we're going to need 4 tvachim. When it's both sides, just a little bit is going to work, and that is how the Gemara ends up both for Rav Yochanan and Shmuel, saying by a chatzar again more stringent than a mavoi, which you have to come back to why. But on one side it's going to be 4. If you just have 1 lechi, then you're going to need 4 tvachim. If you do it on both sides, it could just be a tiny bit on each side. Okay, we have more to say. I would just point out, very interesting, there was a place that was mentioned earlier. If you remember, it said that Rabbi Eliezer was visiting his student, Rabbi Yosef ben Preda, in a place called Ovelin. Ovelin is actually a current city in Israel. It's an Arab city. So if anyone says we weren't there first, it's an Arab city, and there's actually archaeological digs there. They found like shuls over there, but we also now know from our Gemara that Rabbi Eliezer's student, Rabbi Yosef ben Preda, was living in that place, and they clearly had Eruvin in that place. There's clearly a Jewish population that was there a good 2,000 years ago. Have a great day.